Welcome. This is Jack Zenger. Our webinar for today is entitled Accelerating Leadership Development, Why You Should Do This Now. I want to begin by telling you about one of our clients, the Symantec organization. We've had a long-term relationship with this company. They have measured their leaders as they began their program, and then periodically they've assessed the improvement that they have made. They discovered that their leaders had actually shown statistically significant improvement in all of the competencies that we measure. All in all, you would have to say that they had a real success with their program. One day I was talking to the woman who was in charge of this effort, and I said to her, "So, if you were doing this all over again, what would you do differently?" And without hesitation, she said to me, "Jack, I would begin earlier in the people's careers. We need to start earlier than we have in the past." Now, you've all seen a variety of statistics about the urgent need for greater leadership and for the development of more leaders. We read that 60% of companies are facing leadership shortages that really impede their performance. We know that 31% say that developing leaders is their largest single talent issue. We know that about 10,000 baby boomers retire every day. And one group has researched and said that there's been about a 30% decline in what they would describe as appropriately aged managers between the years of 2009 and 2015. Imagine that, a 30% decline in kind of potentially eligible people for key leadership positions. So how might this issue be resolved? What might happen? And we would propose maybe two broad solutions. One is we need to identify those individuals currently in the firm who are capable of stepping into these roles. And then secondly, to accelerate their development in every way possible. Now, there are two potential groups that I'd like to focus on in our discussion today. One group is that group of newly appointed supervisors and team leaders who I believe represent a tremendous potential for us. And the second group is the individual contributors, those people who are the professional, technical people in the organization who become an amazing pool of ability and talent. Let's begin by talking about that group of young supervisors. I'm going to show you a chart which depicts the age of people as they participate in one of our most widely used development programs. And we have collected demographic data so that we know the age of the participant as he or she goes through that program. And the chart that you see before you shows that people under 25, only 2.5% of our participants are that age. And then it goes to 7.8% between 26 and 30, and then you see the rest of them. So that the overall picture is this. The average age of a participant when they first attend one of our programs is 42 years of age. Now, if we back up and think about, so when does the average supervisor begin his or her career? We know that their average age is around 32 or so. So let's kind of assume that maybe they begin when they're 26 or 27, if this is their average age now. So if you kind of put those facts together and you say that, okay, managers are their average age is 42, supervisors they may be 32. What this means is that the average supervisor would typically wait about 9 years before participating in anything but a very rudimentary or basic development program that explains to them how to fill out the forms and do the necessary paperwork attendant to their job. Our conclusion is that we are waiting until leaders move beyond the supervisory level before we start any really serious development. Now, we all know that leadership abilities don't come simply by giving people a title. Research shows that less than 10% of leaders will have any personal development plan unless their company really encourages and provides support and direction. So we believe that one of the big challenges that organizations face is to create a culture that truly values development. And we think that culture begins by, first of all, setting the expectation that everyone will progress. That means beginning at the very top, that the most senior executives will define for themselves a personal plan of development that will guide their annual activities and will kind of encourage them to participate and grow. The second thing is to take development plans seriously. I don't know about you, but I've been in organizations where part of the drill was you have an annual performance review, and down there at the bottom there's a little box that says, what are your plans for development through the next year? And people diligently fill that out, and they put in that they're going to take some courses or go attend some seminar. And then the year slowly progresses, and we come to the end of that next year, and the manager looks at this form and says, oh, well, your development plan said that you were going to take this course and do this seminar, and you were going to do this this kind of activity. And the person says, well, but I got really busy, about this big new project and our new competitor, and we had some technical challenges, and so I just didn't have time to do that. And the boss sort of psychologically pats them on the head and says, no, that's fine. Just roll it over and put it into next year's plan, and we'll work on it next year. And there are no consequences. I mean, there's nothing serious about the failure to follow through on that development plan. Self-development, elevated to a high priority and supported by all levels of management, is what's required if we're going to have a culture that truly values development and holds people accountable for it. The second point, obviously, is that we start development earlier. Older leaders often feel they're in a game where the rules got changed at halftime. I remember very vividly an old first-line manager who was in one of our sessions, and he said in quite colorful language, I feel like I went out and for the first 30 or 40 minutes we played soccer. And then we came in at halftime, and we went back out, and the field had all been changed, and our uniforms were different, and we were now playing rugby. And the rules get changed, and if we wait until people are midway through their career, we've waited too long in terms of getting them properly prepared for a rapidly changing business environment. Development is truly a lifelong habit driven by a set of learning skills, and we can't wait until people are in their mid-40s and 50s to begin doing that and have the kind of payoff that we would all like. The third observation I would make is that when we begin development earlier, fewer painful mistakes are made. One of the things I've really come to believe very strongly in my life is that every worker, in whatever organization they're in, at whatever phase they are in their career, has the right to work for an excellent boss. And I want you to think about that every worker should have the right to be working with an excellent boss. Now, clearly that has numerous payoffs, But we know that learning by trial and error just causes an undue number of mistakes. And those of us who grew up that way, where we had to kind of learn on the job by trial and error, look back with hindsight and say, wow, I wish I'd been able to kind of undo those mistakes by having some proper development much earlier in my life. Let's face it, most people in our organizations today get their development from the role model of the person that they report to. And if they don't have a really good role model, then they're not getting very good training and development, and therefore they acquire bad behaviors, inappropriate leadership practices that really deter their success in their career. And let's face it, graduates from even the best universities, the most prominent institutions in our country and abroad, have seldom had leadership development. Yes, they've had some courses in management. Yes, they've had courses sometimes in accounting. But they've not been trained to be effective leaders. You know, I grew up in the snow country, but it happened that just in my life, I began skiing when I was 40 years of age. And I can assure you that that was not easy, especially when I tried to learn to ski with long racing skis rather than the newer short skis that they recommend for people who are learning to ski for the first time. But I think about my kids and how quickly they learned. Maybe it's because they were close to the ground and didn't mind falling, but when you begin early, you acquire good habits and you get them ingrained in you, and there's a noticeable difference in those who learn a skill at a young age versus those of us who learned when we were older. And I don't ski with the same grace or skill that any of my immediate children do, and certainly my grandchildren. A few hours or days of instruction followed by deliberate, correct practice enabled those kids to ski very proficiently. And that same principle applies to effective leadership. Early instruction followed with, deliberate, correct practice, creates ingrained habits that just serve them well throughout their entire career. The other observation I would make is that when you do that, then collectively that combines to enable the organization to perform at a much higher level. We have compelling data that absolutely proves that there is a strong relationship between leadership skills and things like employee engagement. Yes, there are lots of things that contribute to an employee's level of satisfaction and engagement. Compensation, my coworkers, the nature of the job I do, the resources I have available. There's a long list that we could make of things that affect employee engagement. But of all those, there's one that is clearly the most powerful lever, and that is my boss. And we know that there is just an enormously strong correlation between my boss's leadership skills and my level of employee engagement. We know that the more effective the leaders, the more people are inclined to remain with the organization, that retention goes up, turnover goes down. People don't think about quitting. We know that the effectiveness of leadership strongly impacts customer satisfaction scores. That may be because the employees are more satisfied, and they in turn interact with the customers on a daily basis. But customer satisfaction is driven by the effectiveness of leaders. We know that there's a strong relationship to productivity, that the actual ability for people to produce at a high level is strongly influenced by the nature of their boss. And we've all been seeing recently data coming out indicating that here in the United States, at least, productivity has taken a nosedive of late, which is really frightening because it is improved productivity that determines my living standard and my children's living standard and my grandchildren's living standard. And indeed, it predicts the health of our nation's economy in the long run. And the fact that productivity has declined is rather scary. Leadership skills impact the productivity of workers. And we'll stop here, but the list could go on and on. We also know that innovation is strongly related to the effectiveness of the leaders in the organization. Beginning a decade earlier means the organization benefits from a much longer period of having stronger leaders. And so collectively, if we can develop these leaders in the organization, they will impact in turn the company itself, the firm. Now let me shift from the organization for a moment and just talk about the individual. There's a picture of a man here kind of underwater. At the current time, our observation is that many organizations practice a kind of a sink or swim approach to development. But the question is, how many leaders who sunk, who failed, could have been saved with early on development that gave them the basics for how to lead more effectively? Chances are everybody on this call, on this webinar, knows somebody who began their career working in a position, weren't successful, either they were terminated or they left with a bad taste, who probably could have succeeded had they been given the appropriate kind of developmental experiences much earlier in their career. So what needs to change? There needs to be an emphasis on promotions from within, as many organizations do right now, because the evidence is really clear that promotions from within usually work better. There's fewer failures when people who have grown up in the culture are promoted to positions of responsibility. And so if we can identify early those with leadership potential, and we can provide them with both formal and informal development at a younger age, this will have a significant impact on them personally and on the organization. So let's look at what's happening right now. The classic breakdown of generational groups that we all hear about this from day to day. There's this group maybe called traditionalists who were born from 1930 to 45. Then this baby boomer generation, which is kind of now nearing their retirement or moving into retirement. They were born from 1946 to 65. Then there's the Gen X group, and you can see them, and the Gen Y, or we more frequently refer to them now as millennials, who were born from 1982 till 2000. The data that we have is that we are devoting about 88% of our development efforts to Gen X and those who are older. So traditionalists, baby boomers, and Gen X, they are commanding 88% of our developmental dollars and efforts. Only 12% is going to Gen Y or the millennials. And yet we all know that this is the group who in a very short time will be providing the leadership to our organizations. So let me ask you a couple of questions and ask you to respond. So this little quiz. Gen X and baby boomers, Are they more apt to are more driven to attain peak results for their organization than their younger colleagues, the Gen Y or millennials? So please, if you would, answer true or false, and let's see, kind of have you weigh in as rapidly as possible. And the correct answer is false. Our data shows that the younger group had the highest scores when it came to their being driven to produce great results for the organization. Okay, your second question is, are the more experienced colleagues more inclined to collaborate and be good team players than their younger generation counterparts? So again, please respond true or false. And it looks like a lot of you are weighing in, and that it's kind of mixed. The answer is false again. For the leadership competency that we measure quite regularly, we call collaboration and teamwork. Our Gen Y or millennial participants were at the 60th percentile, and my generation, the traditionalists, were at the 46th percentile. So the younger group, the millennial group, was much more inclined to be collaborative and be good team players than their older counterparts. Another question: openness, willingness to change, and being innovative. Are seniors more inclined to do that than their younger colleagues? So again, please weigh in. And it looks like a number of you are kind of weighing in, and you're getting very accurate here in your responses. It's false. To no one's surprise, the millennials, Gen Y, received the highest scores on innovation, quite a bit higher than those older than they. No one's surprised. And one more question: are seniors more inclined or prone to work on improving themselves and to become better leaders than their kind of younger generation counterparts? Again, if you would, answer true or false to that question. And we're getting some good responses here. And it looks like you're quite correct in assuming that the answer to that is false. The youngest group was at the 64th percentile for practices self-development, while the baby boomers were at the 52nd percentile. So there was a very dramatic difference in people's willingness to kind of take seriously their own self-improvement. I want to switch now to talking about individual contributors in your organizations. We think these are kind of the forgotten leaders, and let's be sure we're all talking about the same group of people. I'm thinking of people who in some organizations would be called a senior scientist, or an analyst, or a senior accountant, or an engineer, or a chemist, or an accountant, or a software engineer. And it's this group of highly professional, often very technical people who don't have people who report to them. Is the term individual contributor leader an oxymoron? Or indeed these people often in positions of influence, do they really shape the other people's thinking, and do people come to them for advice and counsel and direction and encouragement? Are they leaders? And let me kind of state my own strong belief, and that is they are leaders. The fact that they don't have direct reports is not anywhere near as important as the fact that they provide strong direction and guidance to the organization. They're important for a variety of reasons. We all know that they accomplish the lion's share of the work. They provide really vital leadership to the organization. They have a pool of knowledge that they make available to the younger generation. And frankly, they become the pool for future leaders in the organization. And effective leaders require effective followers, and they have been some of the most effective followers in the organization, but who often have the potential to become more formal leaders. So, in sum, I guess I would say, and this is not certainly a new thought, that leadership occurs at all levels of an organization, not just at the top, and in all functional areas, and that the number of people who report to you on a formal straight line does not define who our most important leaders are. Peter Drucker, the wise observer of management, the one who wrote more than 30 books on management and was probably the most influential thinker of our century about management topics, made this observation. You see it here. The most effective organizations are those that enable ordinary people to do extraordinary things. The organization's success kind of depends upon them. And a fellow named Charles O'Reilly, who was a professor at Stanford University, wrote, "Competitive advantage comes not from attracting unusual talent, but from utilizing the people who are already there." And those two observations are very much harmonious with the latest and best research that we see. As we review our data on the impact of a manager's overall ratings of their individual contributors' competencies, and we look at then the productivity of the individual contributors who report to these managers, we see this interesting pattern that as people rate the individual contributors' competencies, the higher the rating of that person's competencies, the greater or the higher the percentage of their productivity for the organization. One more poll. How similar do you believe the individual contributors are, and what development opportunities would really help them in comparison to the managers and the competencies that they need and that they display? In other words, the question is, are these people really different in terms of what they need and what they do, or are they somewhat the same? Is the difference minor, or are they virtually identical? And let me ask you to weigh in on choosing either A, B, C, or D. Extremely different, somewhat different, minor differences, identical. Thank you for jumping on that. It looks like there's some who would say they're identical and some would say they're extremely different. Most of you are in the middle. Our conclusion is this. We deliver to some of our client organizations a program designed to train or develop these individual contributors. We use tools, we use 360-degree feedback instruments, and what is really striking to me is that the competencies that we found really predict the best individual contributors are nearly the same as those that predict highly effective managers and leaders. Yes, there are some slight differences. The slight differences are that the individual contributors tend to be lower on their strategic thinking, a little bit lower on building relationships, They're not as inclined to set stretch goals for other people or and themselves. They're a little bit higher on technical competence. They're higher on taking initiative. But overall, they are remarkably similar in terms of what they need, what they benefit from, and how you can go about developing them. And therefore, I would submit that we best develop this group in much the same way that we develop our leaders in the organization. That is, from our experience with this product that we have called the Extraordinary Performer, if you use multi-rater feedback or assessment with feedback from that assessment to the individual, if you help them see their career derailers or their fatal flaws, if you help them identify what they're really good at, help them know what their strengths are, that whole process is of enormous benefit to them in their career. And that's nearly identical to what we do in leadership development. We begin with assessment. We provide feedback. We provide developmental planning. We have formal programs in some selected areas like coaching or presentation skills or business acumen, things like that. We go on and have follow-up coaching. We find ways to get their manager more directly involved in the development process itself. We can use their current position as the classroom. They don't need to go outside and do things externally when they've got the perfect classroom for their development in their current position. We can encourage them to participate in action learning projects in exactly the same way that we do for the senior managers in the organization. Now, historically, one of the things that we've tried to pay attention to is the issue of people's careers and how you manage careers. And some really good research that was done decades ago talked about how careers follow some stages. And we're going to talk about just quickly 4 stages. The first stage is when people come in the organization and they're learning the fundamentals of a position that they're going to occupy. And we often think about this as being an apprentice or neophyte or rookie or kind of a new hire phase in their career. After doing that for a while, people become more independent and they learn to apply their expertise. And they move into that stage of being professional, independent. They become more of a journeyman in this position that they occupy. Many people love this kind of work and elect to make that not only the mid part of their career, but the end of their career. They love what they're doing as individual contributors. Others kind of move and become mentors, coaches, internal consultants. They generate ideas for the organization, ideas for new products, new markets, new technology. But they move to this phase of influencing others in an informal and more formal way. And then there are some who kind of then move on to kind of shape the organization and its future. They are the visionaries and the pathfinders. They're the statesmen and strategists for the company. And as people move through these stages of their career, they learn and gain those skills through some deliberate effort. Again, these descriptors describe contribution and behavior. They're not necessarily formal positions in the hierarchy. I know it's tempting to equate the two, but please resist that temptation to look at the formal hierarchy as being the major determinant of what contribution people make to the organization. I guess the key point in this discussion is that each stage that we've just described requires some different development. When you come in the organization and you're a neophyte, one of the major things that individual needs to do is to gain the trust of other people And so it's their behavior that enables them to gain that trust. Then they move through that phase of finding ways to gain the technical competence along with the self-management and willingness to kind of take initiative that defines people who are successful in that stage 2. And then as they move forward and upward if they choose, they can develop the interpersonal skills that enables them to work with and work through other people and to influence them more directly. And then finally, for those who aspire to the more strategic thinking, long-term, big-picture elements, that becomes the final stage of that individual's career. All of this, if we do that for our individual contributors and show them how they can better manage their careers, we will have much greater retention of these individual contributors. Let's face it, they are extremely vulnerable if they're not cared for. And the loss of these key contributors can be extremely damaging to the organization. If we provide meaning and purpose and opportunity for mastery, as Daniel Pink talks about in his book called Drive, that's what people want. That's what motivates them in their work. And it is extremely important that the senior people in the organization treat these individual contributors with the utmost of dignity and respect. We've seen that development programs can have a substantial positive impact on the performance of these individuals. So in conclusion, let me just kind of observe that this process of developing individual contributors helps these individuals move from having a job to having a career, and that makes a huge difference. They very much appreciate opportunities for development, and while some employers seem to have difficulty in justifying the cost and the time commitment for this kind of development, there's no question from all the research that we've done that the skills that they acquire and the productivity that those skills enable very much justifies the cost and time commitment the organization makes. And when the organization does this, there is an enormous gain in employee retention. So as we wind up today's webinar, let me just make a couple of concluding observations. My mother used to remind me that no matter how fast I was willing to drive, it's very hard to overcome leaving late by 15 minutes. And I think that's a very powerful and still valid lesson. And so we've talked about the importance of starting earlier in people's careers. I fear many organizations will wait for good economic times, thinking that they can drive faster and make up for starting late. They will throw large sums of money at this leadership development challenge. But, you know, just as there is in the creation of a wonderful little human infant, there's no way to accelerate that process. It just takes time. And I think it takes time to develop effective leaders, and hence our strong encouragement to you to begin earlier in people's careers, to look at those groups we have inside the organization, both the young supervisors and first-level managers, and also that amazing pool of individual contributors who can become the source of leaders for tomorrow. With that, let me thank you for participating in today's webinar. We look forward to hearing any questions you have or comments you have about what we've said today, and wish you well in the process of accelerating the development of these groups. Thanks for being with us.